I record, yeah, actually I do. I was going to say, I record all of them in this room, but that's right. We now have the ability to record them in 2 of the upstairs rooms, so I do it there too. The quality's a little different on the recording, but I think it's serviceable. I mean, some of the things aren't quite as sharp, but yeah. So they're all of it. If you go, like for example, I embed the lectures on the page. If you like double click it, you can open up the video in YouTube, and then you can see the YouTube channel there to see some of the other ones. In addition to actual lectures, on occasions I record like other videos. There's, for example, a social media class, which is only online. I don't have any lectures for, so I've created throughout the term a few short little videos where I just, me in my house just talking. So, giving the cats a lecture on social media. All right. As promised today, we're going to continue talking about tables. And we're going to talk about a couple of additional tags with tables. And then we'll talk about accessibility as far as tables go. Note about tables again is that they should be used only to represent a table of data. And when I say a table of data, what I mean is like something that you would have in an Excel worksheet. An Excel worksheet is essentially a table of data. There are rows and there are columns, and there's numbers or words, I suppose, in there as well. But it's a table of data. That's what I mean, rows and columns, a structure with rows and columns. A table in HTML should not be used to lay out a page. In other words, prior to CSS being widely supported across browsers, web designers still wanted nice layouts for their page. So some web designer got the bright idea of sticking all your code in a table, whether it was a table of data or not. So you might put your logo in one TD, and you might put your banner in another TD, and your navigation in another TD, and so on. That's actually, at the time, it was the only thing that could be done, really, because CSS support was not very good in earlier browsers. However, that practice should not be carried forward. Occasionally, you'll see if, for example, if you went to work somewhere where you were refreshing an older website, you might notice that they did that on an older site. But you should not carry that forward. You should use CSS to style your page because you can do it much more flexibly. I did grade the one lab, and where you had to take create 2 different versions of your page. And the one thing I would say is I guess I would say I was a little lenient on the grading because there's so much you could do with CSS to change the layout of a page, and beyond just changing the colors of the page. If you look, for example, in a lot of my examples, we changed the orientation of the navigation. We moved the positioning of certain things, and so on. So don't limit yourself to that. And really, you have the maximum flexibility when you use CSS for the layout and not tables. But at any rate, tables are used to represent a table of data. And here's the example we went over last time. Where we had a table representing classes that perhaps I would be teaching or other people would be teaching. Again, just to put some additional data in, I duplicated some of the rows over and over again, just so I wouldn't have to sit there and type. All right. We reviewed the basic tags, and we reviewed, I think, a total of 4 tags, if I'm counting correctly. There is table tag, a table is comprised of a set of rows, which are represented in TR tags. Each TR tag is comprised of either THs or TDs, whereas THs represent table headings and TDs represent table data. Everything in a table will exist within a TH or TD tag. All right. In other words, you can't do something like, well, let's see, here I want to put a paragraph. All right. If you do that, actually what it does is it will show the paragraph outside of the table. So notice, even though that paragraph was here after the headings, the paragraph shows outside the table. So you can't go in and put something in that's not part of the table. All right? Everything in your table ultimately is going to be in a TD or a TH tag. If I truly wanted a paragraph, let's say in the middle of the table, what I would do is I would break it out and have two tables. I would have the first table, I would then have the paragraph, and then I would have the second table. Because again, you can't put something in the middle of a table. We played around a bit with styling, and with styling we were able to do some things. We were able to change the size of the table. We were able to give different colors. We were able to give a border on the table cells, and so on. We actually used a combination of all the three ways that we've discussed to define style rules in this example. We defined some style rules based on their HTML tag. Tables get this style rule. THs get this rule. TDs get this rule. We gave styles based on IDs. The schedule table, the thing with an ID of schedule, gets this style rule. The thing with an ID of headings gets this style rule. And then finally we defined another style rule based on class. Class being where there's not necessarily a unique element that has that class, but many elements can share that class. And we use that to get the alternating rows that assists in the readability of the form of the table. So anyhow, that's what we had from last time. Do we have any questions over what we covered last time? All right, let's go on to a couple of other tags associated with the form. One of the tags is a description of the form. Now, some of these tags have accessibility implications. So the description is good because, again, it helps with the accessibility of the page. Just like you include an alt attribute on an image to explain what the image is, the description attribute on a table can be accessed by a screen reader and give a person accessing the page via screen reader an idea of just what the table is. All right? People that can see can look at a table like this and instantly sort of get an idea what's going on. All right? Because you see the rows. You know, each row represents a different class. Each column represents some characteristic of that class. You can come to that conclusion without even thinking about it, really. All right? You just look and you see it and you know how it is. People that can't see where the screen reader is reading the table to them, the table becomes linearized. By that I mean it gets read in sequence. course number, course name, credit hours, days, instructor, CISS 216, web development 3, Monday and Wednesday, Zellers, and so on down the line. If the table is being read to you that way, it's sort of easy to lose track of what, the forest for the trees, as they say. You kind of lose the overall purpose of the table. And that's what one thing the description attribute on a table tag can provide, is a description of what the overall purpose of the table is. So you can put on the table an attribute of description that says something like, this is a table that shows a list of classes, list of CISS classes for spring 2012. All right. You know what? Let me go and look, because my memory may have gone. Maybe it is summary instead of description. I stand corrected. It is summary. Thank you very much. So, AV folks, go when you upload this video for me, go back and dub the word summary over every time I say the word description in the first 5 minutes of class. No, you're right. It's summary. My mistake. All right. So the summary does, again, it summarizes the table, and it puts the table in context for people that can't look at the table and see at a glance what the purpose of the table is. All right. Another thing that can do a similar, that serves a similar role, but it also is displayed, is the caption attribute. And the caption tag. I can put on a table a caption of and I then get, by default, centered over the table, the caption that I put there. Yes?
Now that would be sort of like a sort of header type of a...
Well, it's not a header, because a header typically is a header for a column. All right, so yeah, this is more of a caption on the entire table that says, whereas the header says course number, course name, credit hours, the caption describes the overall table. Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question here. What is the difference? And don't answer in terms of the way it would look. Answer in terms of conceptually what the difference is. I could put, for example, an H1 or an H2 or whatever on top of this that said the same thing. So I could put that there, or I could use a caption. What's the difference between using a caption and using an H1? What's maybe the advantage of using a caption? With the screen viewer, all right. And how so with the screen viewer?
It's definitely associated with the
because it's very good. It's definitely associated with the table. All right. That H1, visually, we can see that's associated with the table because it's right over top of it. But if a screen reader, if someone's navigating using a screen reader and navigating through the elements, they may lose track of that. Not so with the caption, because the caption is actually part of the table. All right? And therefore, the screen reader or any other assistive technology knows that that's associated with the table. So that's going to go with the table. All right? So, again, it's a case of using the tag that best describes the purpose of the content that you're putting there. All right? And I think I talked about this before. Don't lie to your browser. Use the proper tag for the proper meaning. All that sort of thing. Don't use an H1 just because you want your text to be big. Don't use an H2 just because you want your text a little bit smaller. Right? H1s and H2 represents levels of headings. So no matter how big you want the heading, right, use an H1 if it's a top-level heading. If it's a second-level heading, use an H2, and so on. Now, again, you might say, and I'm glad we didn't get that as an answer, you might say, well, I might not want it to be centered, and I might want it a different size than that. That's all just CSS, right? We can go and we can change that caption to look any way we want to based on the CSS. So if we want that to be bigger, I can do something like this, and I can say caption. I can make font size 2M, let's say, color red, background, pound, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Finally, text align right. And then we get it to look like that. All right. So again, don't let the fact that you want it to look a certain way suggest what tag to use, because through CSS we can make pretty much any tag look pretty much any way we want to. Questions over this so far? Yes.
Well, just a quick one. Now, say if I wanted to have the table or the text in it, text align center, would that go in the table tag?
You wanted everything, both the TDs and the THs.
Right. Say I wanted, the headers, and I wanted to have all the data center.
Yeah.
So would that go in the table tag for that?
Yeah. What we could do then is, let's go and let's take out all the alignment, and we'll just put it in the table tag, and that should do the trick, but we'll see for sure. So let's get rid of the TH rule. Let's get rid of this. And we should be, okay, that center, that's left align. If I go in here and specify on the table, text align center, that center aligns everything. Yeah. Yes, it does. Remember, again, the rules cascade down. What does that mean? That means that in this case, for example, the TH belongs to the TR, which belongs to the table. Therefore, if I put a style rule on the table, if it's not overridden on the TR, or if it's not overridden on the TH, the style rule I put on the table will apply, and it will center the text. Now again, it does get a little confusing when you start throwing in IDs and classes as well. But again, a good general rule to remember is that the more specific a rule is defined, that takes precedence over the rules that are less specifically defined. Well, we can leave it like that. All right. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is, and again, my confidence is shook a little bit based on my earlier error, so I'm going to look this one up. T-head, T-body, T-foot. Okay. It's possible to have multiple rows of headings as well as multiple rows of data, and finally multiple rows of footers. And what do I mean by footers? Probably the most obvious example would be if we had some sort of totals at the bottom of the table. Like, there's really nothing to add up in this example. Yeah, that doesn't really matter. You know, gee, you search for CISS classes, and the total of all CISS classes credit hours is 63,000. You know, that not terribly meaningful. But yeah, I guess we could. All right. What we're going to do instead, though, is we're going to count them. All right. So we have our table that looks like this. And we could have one or multiple lines as headers. We have the data, which we'll call the body. And then we have totals or other stuff that we'll call the footer of it. We can use the T-head, the T-body, and T-foot to further style those sections. In addition, these have accessibility implications as well. All right, because again, it helps group the table for someone accessing it with a screen reader. All right. So what I could do is, let's say I'm going to put the count of how many CISS classes are there in the last line of the table. I'm just going to copy this. And let's see, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 classes, if I did not miscount. And I could do something like this. And I could pad out the table cells with non-breaking spaces so that I get blank spaces there. Whoops. And then, to designate that this isn't regular table data, I can specify that this actually belongs in the footer of the table by putting in the T-foot tag. Now, all right, we could apply a different style to the footer if we wanted to. And I could say up here, T-foot and notice we get a darker gray for the background and a red for that. We can do the same thing if we want to with the heading section. especially if there's more lines than one, which there could conceivably be. All right. And likewise, we can do the same thing with the body. It sort of gives us just another level that we can style. I won't go over a specific example of styling the T-head and T-body, but it would work about the same as it would for the T-foot. Oops. Again, this also has accessibility implications because it helps a screen reader sort of figure out the way that a table is structured. Now, one thing that you might notice, that last row consists of 5 cells, or 5 table cells, just like all the other rows do, yet the first 4 of them are blank. All right? One thing that you can do is you can use an attribute called call span. Oops, I don't want 2, I want 5. And the call span of 5 says this one TD, I want to go across 5 different columns. So instead of just being in that one little column at the end, this one TD cell will go across all 5 columns of the table. All right. And there you notice that it's really centered. And that one TD cell takes up the whole width of the table. I'm going to go change that to white because the red's a little hard to read. Call span and call span as a cousin, which is row span, which works about the same way. For example, if Zellers taught 2 of these courses, I could put row span on this one and it would go across both columns. Generally speaking, I won't say don't use them, but you really want to avoid using them because you don't want your tables to be too complicated. Back in the days prior to CSS, and when people used tables to lay out their page, people did all these crazy, intricate things with their tables. They used call spans and row spans, and they nested tables. In other words, they had a table where one of the TDs itself would contain a little mini table. All right? Tables like that are very complicated and are very hard for screen readers to interpret, but in addition, they're very hard for people to understand the code and to be able to go in and make changes. Now, let me give you a for instance. For instance, let's say I wanted to show spring and summer in one table. I'm going to go and I'm actually going to copy this one, and I'm going to call it bad table. Because this is something that you shouldn't do. But some developers do things like this. Especially some developers that are used to sort of old school using tables for everything sort of mentality. So they won't use a caption because actually they have two captions, right? One for spring and one for fall or summer. But web developers would do something like that. This is one table, and they thought they were clever by getting 2 for 1 and putting in actually a spring and a summer. That second one's supposed to be for summer 2012. A spring and a summer table all in one table tag, and by using call span and stuff like that, make it look like it's 2 separate tables when actually it's just one table. You want to avoid doing stuff like that. All right? You don't want to lie to your browser. Again, fundamental principle. All right? This is actually 2 separate tables, right? Therefore, it should be in 2 separate table tags. Notice all the bad things I'm doing. The spring 2012 is actually the caption of the table, right? So it should be in a caption tag. It shouldn't be in a TR, TH, call span equals 5. All right? What that's doing is instead of using the caption tag, which is perfectly well suited for this sort of thing, this is lying to your browser and saying that's just another header. But, oh yeah, it's a header that goes across all 5 columns. Now, why did I do that here? I did that here because I can't put the caption of 2012 or spring 2012 because the second part of the table relates to summer of 2012. So you can only have one caption for a table, but I could do this trick all day, right? And have just a bunch, have combine as many tables as I want to. All right? So again, the correct solution to this, and let me go and save this as good table. Would be to separate this into 2 separate tables. So I mentioned things like the call span with a little bit of apprehension. Because just because you can do something in HTML doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it in HTML. So instead, I'm going to go and I'm going to build 2 tables. And I'm properly going to use the caption tag. Now the call span for the very last row to show the totals, that sort of makes sense. That's not really an issue. I'm going to get rid of the positioning on this one. This is a much better version. It does virtually the same thing. All right? Except that's 2 tables instead of 1 table that's trying to pass itself off as being 2 tables. Okay? So don't lie to your browser. Do things the right way. If you have a table of data, use 1 table tag. If you have 2 tables of data, don't say, well, I can get by just by using 1 table tag if I cram it in this way and do some clever call spans and all that. All right, that's sort of twisting the language. The better way to do it is if you have two tables of data, make two tables tags. Doesn't cost any more, right? And it provides much simpler code for you to maintain, and it also provides code that is more accessible for people accessing it with the screen reader. So in general, I guess the lesson here is keep your tables simple. Nested tables, if you're using tables properly, nested tables will be very rarely used. I won't say never, but will be very rarely used. Most of the time I've encountered having nested tables is back when we used tables to accomplish the layout of a page. All right, another notion for accessibility is the notion of headers and IDs. All right? I'm going to close this one, the good and bad, and we're just going to focus on the one table example. Now, I kind of alluded to this last time, that if you want to know, gee, what are the credit hours for this class, what would you do? You'd follow across until you found the column that said credit hours. In other words, visually your eyes can navigate the two dimensions of this form. And you know that what this is represents the intersection of this row and this column. So Tuesday and Thursday are the days that CISS 143 is offered. Remember, though, that we have someone walking past in apparently Halloween costumes, although maybe I shouldn't assume that. Maybe they're not walking past in Halloween costumes. I actually dressed up in a costume yesterday, and if any of the kids complimented me on my costume, I asked them what costume. And that did not get a laugh once, let me tell you. I think the best it got is when my older daughter was there. She might have given a moan or a snicker or something like that. But at any rate. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put some code in here to help people that are accessing this with the screen reader get the sense of the two dimensions of this. All right? We're going to start off, first of all, by putting IDs on each of the THs. And I'm doing this even though I'm not styling these. I'm going to use these IDs for another purpose other than styling. All right. I'm also going to put an ID on the first column of each row. Why? Because that's sort of like the heading of that row, right? If I were to look at this, course name of what? Of CISS 216. Credit hours of what? CISS 216. So I'm going to use that as to represent sort of the row header. So these are the column headers, these are the row headers. Now, what I need to do is I need to, for the rest of the table cells in that row, I need to associate those table cells with the row and column to which they belong. And I do that via the headers attribute. And what I do is I just put those in quotes separated by commas. So I put the ID of the column header and row header for each of these. All right. So the screen reader, if I'm reading this cell, Zellers, what does Zellers represent? Does Zellers represent the author of the textbook or what? These headers point to the ID of this and the class name or the class code of that. This is one thing that a lot of students miss in the tables assignment. And in a way, I can't blame students because I don't know if the book goes into this. However, I am going into this, and I have some resources out there that talk about this. And therefore, this is what you need to do to truly make your table accessible. Now, you need to do this for each table row. I'm not going to do that because, just in the interest of time. I will, however, insert a comment on my page. A comment is something that the browser ignores, but anyone reading the code will see. And I'll say, we should put headers on all TDs. Oops. Every row, but in interest of time, won't. And remember, that's my excuse. That's not your excuse. All right? This is a form of a comment. It starts with that and ends with that. When code is included in that, the browser doesn't do anything with it. So notice that the browser just ignores that. But you can put explanatory notes in your code that way. I actually did have a student ask how to do that. So this is a good example of how to do that. You could do things like put in the name of the person that created the code, the date that they did, other sort of explanatory notes that you think would be useful to someone coming back and changing this or looking at the code at some future point in time. Now there's other potential ways that you can handle accessibility for tables, but this one is one that we're going to discuss in class. Let's look at Angel at a couple of the resources associated with accessibility. Let me point out where those are so that if you need to go back and refer to something, you can. Underneath resources, underneath accessibility resources, this has a good section about forms and tables. So if we look at data and layout tables over here, it'll talk about this. It explains how the tables are linearized. In other words, they're read in a sequence. And it talks about the use of the IDs and the headers to properly associate the columns with that. It also talks about what I talked about, how don't combine one table or don't combine two tables into one, but separate them out into their own tables. Summary and caption, we talked about. And so on. This talks about use of layout tables, and it says this topic is controversial. In this class, this topic is not controversial. You simply won't use tables for layouts. End of controversy. All right? So, but do know that this is writing to a wider audience, and I do think this is a bit older when possibly more people were using tables for layouts. Nowadays, that generally doesn't seem to be done near as often as it used to. All right. That is it for tables. The one thing, again, that many people miss on this assignment is they don't take into account the code for accessibility. So invariably, I will take off a point and say something like, you don't have any code for accessibility. And the students will say, what do you mean? And I'll say, remember in class when I said I was going to take off a point if you didn't put in the IDs and headers. And sometimes they remember, sometimes they don't. All right. But there's that resource that you can go back and refer to. Are there any questions? I believe I postponed the due date on the assignment until Wednesday because it was normally due today, but we still had a few things to wrap up with that. Remember, your project is coming due. The first part of your project is coming due, the design. So please, as I had mentioned before, bring your materials to class. It's possible we may have some time to discuss, work on, however you want to put it, your semester project. Other questions? All right, we'll see you over in lab.